So welcome to the last EAP Occasional Seminar of 2021. For those of you that I haven't met yet, I'm Kelly Swayze, the Diversity and Inclusion Liaison for Fulbright programs in East Asia and the Pacific. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Caucasian woman with short blonde hair, wearing a green shirt and a black sweater. I'm sitting in front of a cream wall with a green and blue batik panel behind me. These EAP occasional seminars feature speakers who will share their expertise on topics of inclusion, diversity, and access. These seminars really aim to engage all of us at the commissions and posts around the region in discussion about contemporary theories of D, E, A, and I from a Western lens, and the narratives, challenges, and advancements that shape the perspectives and concerns of Fulbright program participants from the US coming into the region. In order to encourage discussion and interaction during the seminars, I would ask that you all please join into the conversation after Ruby, our speaker, makes her presentation. And I do have some questions that were sent in advance that I will ask her after she presents. I would like to thank ECA and the East Asia and the Pacific team from Fulbright ECA for their support and assistance in running these events. So without further ado, I'm very glad to introduce today Rubi Flores, who will be speaking to us on the topic, creating an LGBTQ+ inclusive Fulbright, from small steps to broad cultural conversations. Rubi is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Fulbright Prism. After graduating in 2019 from FSU, Rubi received a Fulbright grant to Mexico, where she participated in the binational business program. While in Mexico, she worked for an NGO that sought to strengthen the DE&I culture and policies of corporations and government agencies. After returning to the US in 2020, Rubi joined the board of Fulbright Prism. As many of you know, Prism is a volunteer-based and now a registered nonprofit organization that aims to empower LGBTQ+ Fulbrighters. Rubi currently works for an advocacy organization focused on passing national immigration reform. Rubi, I'm very glad to have you with us today and feeling very grateful that you're here, although you're not feeling well. So we will try and not make this too heavy of a seminar for you. But thanks so much for being willing to share your experiences with us. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you now.
Great, thank you so much. And as Kelly said, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am feeling quite sick, so at times I might go off camera, to cough, to sneeze. It's quite nasty over here, so please bear with me. But I do want to say that the reason why I'm still pulling through it and trying to participate today is that I think these issues are incredibly important. I think a lot of people within the Fulbright community, and in my experience in Prism, whether it's IIE, the Fulbright Association, Fulbright itself, a lot of people are trying to figure out what to do in an organization and a system that is really slow to move, right? I think there's a lot of institutional movement that has to happen. And so any small steps that we can all take collectively to figure out what the best option to move forward is, because I don't think anyone knows, and no one person can know, since this is all incredibly global and all solutions have to be localized for us to figure out how to move forward. So I have a few, I think, recommendations that Kelly and I have talked through and kind of framed in the context of the title of the talk, right? Just small steps that we can, I think, commissions can take, and then moving forward to sort of more difficult conversations that, again, I don't really know how to figure out, but I think are good points to start a conversation. But I'm happy to start just my talk just by telling you all about me, about my experience with Fulbright, and some of the reasons why I feel like I have some of these background experiences that I think inform why I'm recommending what I'm recommending, right? I don't think I'm an expert in the field, but I am a person that has lived through some of these issues firsthand and experienced the discrimination. And so I'm happy to share what that was and what I feel like and I believe would have helped mitigate some of those negative experiences. So as Kelly said, I graduated in 2019 from Florida State University, and I went back to my home country. I was born in Mexico and I was raised there until I was 10. And afterwards, I moved to South Texas, where I actually am back. I just arrived 2 days ago, and I think all the movement is what has caused this terrible sickness. Um, but anyhow, I think to set the context, I was very familiar with the culture in my country, right? I can say in Mexico, I knew sort of what that culture was. I knew the level of acceptance or lack thereof for LGBTQ individuals. And yet I still felt like I would be okay, right? I think I felt like I was coming as a American student or American graduate coming with a prestigious award, and I felt like that would in some ways protect me from any possible discrimination. Um, but my program wasn't teaching English, it wasn't doing research, it was a business program where we were all placed, excuse me, all placed in a business setting or a nonprofit that focused at the intersection of policy and business. And so after we were accepted into the program, as everyone is in Fulbright, whether it's any kind of different award, we would then go through interviews with different organizations. After that, those uh, interviews with all the organizations and the matching process came through, I was notified that, in fact, I was not matched with any company because I was discriminated against, right? Because of my identity. I am a trans woman. And at that point in time, I did not use my current name. I used my legal name precisely because the Fulbright program obliges students to apply with their legal name, something that I understand. And I think came up with one of the questions and I hope we can address. Um, but that was the reality, right? Because the name didn't match what was on the screen, and it was very obvious that I was an other. I was not placed in any specific company, and instead, the commission in Mexico found a quote unquote solution where I went to work with this nonprofit organization that focused on LGBTQ D&I work with companies. It turned out to be a great opportunity for me, and I learned a lot and I grew a lot. But I have to say that for me, it felt extremely ghettoizing and isolating to be placed in such an organization. This is not something I wanted. Um, and needless to say, to have this news of I was freshly graduated, I was 22, and to be confronted with the reality of what my identity meant, especially in my country, was extremely difficult. So anyway, that was my experience in Mexico. Other than that, I feel like there were instances of discrimination. There were instances where I didn't know where to turn as a trans woman, as an LGBTQ individual. One of the reasons why I did Fulbright Prism. Um, but needless to say, I think there are things that can be done to move forward. So moving right along, I think I separated these recommendations into sort of three buckets. One bucket being the very easy, quote unquote easy, simple solutions that can be shown as first steps from commissions that don't require necessarily the help of the Fulbright program itself or changes from them. And that in some ways show grantees that you as commissions are on the side of grantees, which I think can go a really long way, even if you don't mitigate any of the discrimination that can happen or will happen. Showing that you are on their side and understand what's happening with them is, I think, the first step to trying to bridge this divide. The second issue are some of the things that I think have to change from the Fulbright program perspective. But within that, I think there are sort of workarounds that commissions can do in the meantime. And if anything, once there are listening sessions or such from the Fulbright program itself, something that I think commissions could push forward with. And then the third bucket is, I think, this hard conversations where I have no idea what the solution is. I think these are very localized issues, and I think it's just a starting point for us to have a conversation. Excuse me one more time. Wow, this is just an awful cold, just terrible. All right. So I think the first bucket is simply giving resources and acknowledgements, starting from the orientation, the midterm reunion. I forget what these are called, but I think there's a midterm. I had in my commission a midterm reunion, check-in, whatever it's called. And something that can even be sent starting from via email, right? Once your grantees are accepted into your countries. So I think providing a guide of resources specifically tailored for LGBTQ issues is huge. I think for me personally, I did not know where to turn to or what sort of legal status of things were. So the two most important aspects that we at Fulbright Prism have found to be are medical resources and legal status of the country. Many times students go to these countries and have no idea what are the legal standing, right, of being openly LGBTQ, or what can happen if someone actually has a real sort of concern with the legal system. The second part is being medical resources. Number one being transition resources, how to find proper medical care for trans grantees, something that I personally struggled very much. But the other side is just simply being sexual health, finding HIV testing, finding whether it's just the specific doctors or specific areas of town where doctors can and when one can be open with their medical professional about their sexual practices, something that I think in the United States is incredibly crucial, and that whether you try to find a solution or not, individuals will be living their own lives. And I think trying to be trying to provide resources for individuals to be as safe as possible is always the most important. The other part of this is trying to provide, if possible, local organizations, NGOs, cultural groups that are focused on LGBT communities in the areas where individuals are placed. Of course, this cannot always be found, and especially if individuals were placed not in huge metropolitan areas. But I think gathering a list of resources and organizations for people to go to can really show the grantees that there is someone to turn to, and not simply, oh yeah, Susan, who's a lesbian in our commission, can talk to you. Something, by the way, that I'm not making up. In our survey, this came up multiple times where commissions just simply pointed grantees to the lesbian or the gay person that worked in their office, which is just not the way to go, in my personal opinion. Great. So I think the second bucket of issues and recommendations are the more substantial and meaty things that commissions can take care of. But again, these need to be, I think, workarounds and cannot be done fully without the cooperation of the Fulbright Commission. The first, I think, issue is the issues of names. I mentioned that I could not use a preferred name. I had to use my legal name. And this is, of course, the name that's going to be shown on my transcripts at university, the name that my passport has to travel abroad. All these things that are legal and that require it. However, there is in no place and not at no point in the Fulbright process where you can put a preferred name, where if necessary, you want to have and need the legal name to have a preferred name that is actually shown during interviews to be shared for letters of recommendation to be had. And most importantly, the name to be shared for the people that individuals grantees will interact with on a day-to-day while they're in country. So this is, I think, the part where commissions can take some initiative. And when you receive the whole package, which I know is like a huge little booklet of things that correspond to the individual, to then actually in some way create a Google form, send an email asking for preferred names, do something where you can actually then, when you contact local schools, for example, for English teaching assistants, or local institutions where individuals will be conducting their research, whatever the case may be, for that institution, for that school, for that host family, to know the grantee by their preferred name and trying to quote unquote hide or just simply not use the legal name in any other form that is not necessary, right? To me, it sounds quote unquote simple. I understand there's many works around, there's many forms that maybe can't be moved, but I think this is something that is really necessary. I'm sorry. The next two items I think are a little bit harder. This comes for placements for individuals that cannot hide or do not wish to hide their gender identity or sexual orientation and be placed in an area of a country that is not only unpleasant, but dangerous. So I think there have been cases where, because this is a taboo subject, because we don't speak about this in the interview process, because I personally did not want to disclose my identity, my in my statement of purpose or personal statement. Commissions don't know who these individuals are in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation, and the Fulbright Commission believes that this is not something that they should ask for safety reasons. Whether I agree or not, I don't know, actually. I think it's a very difficult issue. But the fact is that then there are cases where individuals are placed in an area of the country that is really not accepting, that is not just not accepting, but can be physically dangerous for the grantee to be placed in. And then I'm sure you all have had experiences where grantees go back to their country, whether they're open about why it was or not, is the next issue, right? And so I think what ends up happening is that it's a game of chance, whether a vulnerable, quote unquote, LGBT grantee is placed in an area of the country that is accepting or not. I think we can all agree that that's not a very efficient way to support LGBTQ Fulbrighters. And I think it can be somehow a mitigation effort can be found. Again, I don't have the pure answer, but if we are serious about trying to tackle this issue, I think this is an area that we should all begin to think about and explore. Whether, again, in this initial, do you have a preferred name? Do you have a preferred pronoun? Do you feel like, maybe this is a question that you can ask the grantees, right? Do you feel like that you will be very vulnerable in an area that is not accepting of LGBTQ individuals? And making sure that as a commission, you do not place this individual in that said area. The third part of this, there is, I think, nothing that commissions can do, and that is insurance. Insurance that we are given, ASPI, is great. When I was in Mexico, I had an infection. I had to take antibiotics as I am taking now, and it was paid for, and it was fabulous. But it explicitly said that they could not pay for any gender reassignment, any medications, anything related to gender identity. As a trans person, I need that medication to maintain my health because I am so far along that I cannot go back without having health risks. That involved, for me, incurring extra costs to fly back to the United States, to use my insurance, which thankfully I had from my parents, to continue my treatment. That also included my parents having to mail me my medications through international mail, which was both extremely expensive and risky, that it was a possibility that it would not arrive to me. And if it didn't arrive, I don't know what I would have done. So I think this is just something for us to be aware of, to acknowledge, and to maybe perhaps start to think about anything that can be done and advocate for a more inclusive insurance program from the Fulbright program. And just to say, I mean, the language that was used was extremely offensive in this disclosure part of the insurance, the ASPI. You know, they use language that is not the language I use, but very offensive language, in my personal opinion. Moving on to the third bucket, right along, because my voice is going to die on me. I think it's the question of conversations and balance between how we as United States, especially students in university institutions, are used to speaking about our gender identity, sexual orientation, and the reality of the culture in many of the countries where your commissions are placed. Um, just to start with, again, this is, I think, extremely variable. I think this is localized and something that I can't necessarily speak to. Um, but I think there are some things that we can acknowledge, again, just as a group, and try to come up with some solutions and some sort of starting points. The first thing I want to say is that we should all keep in mind that there are individuals that cannot not disclose their identity, right? So when it comes to how do I support or how do we balance LGBT grantees disclosing their identity, there are some students that just can't not disclose that in their voice, in the way they present themselves, in the way if they have started medically transition. There's just no way individuals will not know that they are part of the LGBT community. Or simply mannerism. I mean, it's just people just can't hide it sometimes. They just can't. But that being said, I think there is a balance to strike. Obviously, you all cannot control what local institutions, universities, host families will say or do, right? And I think the conversation with LGBT grantees has to start from that place of honesty. We do not know if you will experience an incident of discrimination. This is the reality of the country, right? Laying down what the possibilities for LGBT grantees, something you have seen in the past, being very honest with the LGBTQ grantees, while at the same time trying to be empathetic and trying to be as much as possible supporting them in terms of actually advocating for that LGBTQ grantee. So if it comes to breaking a tie with a local school, I think obviously this is not for me to say that it's possible or not. But if it has to come down to the commission supporting the grantee or cutting a tie, I think it is up to you all to decide whether you can or should do that. Um, but being honest and to be able to support that grantee as much as possible is, I think, the first step. In my opinion, for me, I cannot expect a commission or any organization that I work with to solve the issue of discrimination. But once I hear from the institution, from the commission, from whatever it may be, that they will support me, that they will try to work to prevent that in the future, that in and of itself is a huge step, right? So I think that's where the conversation has to begin with. And the last thing I want to touch is that in any of these instances, there can and will be pushback from LGBTQ grantees that you're not doing enough. We, I think, as an LGBT community, and especially as young people and young students, are sort of almost trained to be a little bit, I don't know how to say it, but to be forward and to express what we believe in, and can sometimes be a bit combative. And so I think there's an aspect that you should expect it, not saying you should not listen to it, but that it will come, pushback will come, and simply acknowledge that that is part of the frustration because they are living in a place that they do not feel accepted. In my personal opinion, I believe that if we're going to a country, we cannot change that country. We are there to experience the country. But if there's something the commission can do, I hope that we can find a way to do that. So those are my three buckets, three recommendations. I know Kelly has some questions that we can delve into some of the specifics that I just talked about. And I'm looking forward to hearing more questions and for us to start a conversation in 30 minutes we have of what can be done.
Ruby, thank you so much for that really invaluable information, and also for hanging through with us when you're really not feeling well. I so appreciate it. It's really, I think, important that we get these insights from you and from others in the LGBTQ plus community, because there's just a lot of these aspects that I think for some of us, we're not aware of because we don't experience it ourselves. And so without experiencing it and knowing about these things, it just doesn't come into our frame of imagination or reference when we are planning for programs or trying to plan how to support our grantees as best that we can. And I think you've given us a lot of really concrete actions that we can take, and also some things to think about larger changes within the structure of the program that are things that we can perhaps advocate for with ECA and the State Department to think about in terms of the way that they structure the program to better support LGBTQ plus participants and grantees. So I did have a few questions that came through. I think you've answered quite a bit of this, so I'm just going to sort of shorten these before we go to the larger conversation with the audience. There was a question again about this, the issues of administration. So, collecting grantee data for immigration purposes is often a really rigid process, as you referenced. Questions about biological sex or birth name or where your preferred name is used versus your legal name. And then we also have the issues of visas only allowing legally married spouses, so dependent visas in terms of the Fulbright program as well, which is might be another issue for some of our LGBTQ plus participants. And this person was just asking about other suggestions about how we can sort of make the best of this, or perhaps make this process more comfortable for participants. And also if there's anything that we can do in terms of supporting participants and grantees when they're in communities, like buddy systems or some kind of program that we can put into place for check-ins to provide extra support. So if you have any additional feedback on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, I touched on it, but I think it's so important for us to go back to it, because I think this is one of the first steps that Commission can take that is sort of actionable. I think we can, as commissions, you cannot change how the Fulbright application is done by itself. And so Fulbrighters will continue to have to use their legal name in the application and all the ensuing documents that are given in there. I think, as I said, I had the personal experience to do it. I understood this is how things work in the world. And I just rolled with it because I wanted to have a Fulbright grant, and I went through it. However, I think there is a part where individuals have to live for a full year being addressed by their work, whether it's a university, a local school, that I think that the Commission can take steps to, if not hide the legal name, put over it or put in another document, this is a preferred name that you should refer this individual and address this individual as. How we go about finding that information from the grantee is, I think, the more difficult conversation. At what point can you ask the grantee what if they have a preferred name, and if they would not be okay being addressed by their former or legal name? I think it's really hard because you have to circumvent the fact that all of the other documents are already in file. But whether that happens during an orientation where you have these individuals face to face, whether it happens via an email correspondence, I think there can be something to be done that will mitigate them having really negative experiences for a whole 10 months, a year, whatever the grant duration is. On the questions of visas for dependents, I think there is nothing as commissions that can be done, right? It's just something that I think has to be advocated with a greater ECA Fulbright Commission itself. And then in terms of buddy systems, absolutely. And I think this is something that, again, can be done in the first sort of bucket that I mentioned, along with resources, whether it's medical, legal. I think you can connect individuals to local organizations, but you can also connect them to each other. You can form identity groups. And I don't think this has to be exclusive for the LGBT community. I think individuals of different ethnic and racial minorities can also benefit from having somebody to check in with, whether it's just through WhatsApp, whether it's a physical meetup, to establish sort of very flexible and fluid identity groups during orientation that can continue to serve as sort of reunion models for people to connect with each other and have similar experiences. I think if you're able to set that up with your grantees at orientation, many people would be very, very thankful. And I will finally just say that Fulbright Prism really wants to create sort of in the future, not the moment, but try to create a mentorship program, try to create a more network, right, of Fulbright grantees or LGBT alumni and grantees. Please remain in contact with Fulbright Prism about whether you have LGBTQ students that want to connect with alumni, because this is something that we want to continue and try to support individuals because it can be very isolating.
Thank you, Ruby. I wanted to ask one more question related to what you had said earlier in terms of these administrative challenges. You said that you didn't want to disclose your identity on your Fulbright application initially. So I guess my question is two parts. At what point in the process, when a participant is accepted into the program, do you think is the appropriate time for commissioner post staff to ask about identity? Or is there some way that we can put some sort of added sort of prompt or something within the actual initial application process itself that would encourage people to talk about this if they wanted to? I'm curious as to why you didn't want to disclose your identity, if you're willing to talk about that, if you felt like it was going to be held against you in some way, or and where we can help to work that in, because I think commissions and posts have control to some degree over some of the materials, the administrative and admitting materials for candidates. So any input you could give us with that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. I did not want to disclose my identity and talk about it in my application because I thought I would not get the grant if people knew. And not only if people knew, but if they thought if they perceived that I was speaking about it in order to get the grant, right? I think there is the fear for me as a Mexican to be perceived from other Mexicans that this is not who we are as a country, that you should not use this as a quote unquote I don't want to say crutch, but I think I perceived the commission in Mexico to possibly, this is me before meeting anyone. I don't want to say that this is the case, but this is my perception as a young student about to graduate the following year, that they would perceive me to be trying to get sort of victim points or something, right? And so that's why they would perceive it and why I did not write it in my application. I think, yes, ideally, if we can have in the application itself, again, I don't think a commission itself can do it by itself. I think it has to be done by ECA, and actually applications are done by IIE. So it would have to come from all of them. But yes, a disclosure that if you so wish to disclose, this is something that Fulbright itself is open about. I think the fact that Fulbright program has in recent years done more, I think for the 75th anniversary, Fulbright had a talk with Sasha Velour, the drag queen. I think these are steps that Fulbright is taking to show that they are inclusive, and that's great. But a lot of students, personally, I did not know and did not follow Fulbright before I applied for a Fulbright, right? I researched a lot of topics. I went to my university scholarship office, but it's not like I was following them on social media and knowing what events they held. So I think having a disclosure is really important. Now, I'm being realistic. I'm gonna say that these changes will not happen from ECA and AIE in the foreseeable future. So I think that that point of where do you ask is really important. And I think um, that it would be easiest once an individual is accepted. Because then the individual, me being my only source of experience, I would not have felt like I was being targeted, like I could possibly not get it if I disclosed it. To me, it would feel I'm safe. I got the grant, and you can absolutely specify this is not going to affect any place, any fact that you will not become into the grant. But this is merely to be able to better support you. I also think the language can be really interesting in how it's framed, and I'm happy to continue corresponding with individuals. I'm sure you can share my information with them, Kelly. But I think that getting the language right is crucial, right? It's not like we want to know what you like and what you don't like, and sexually, right? I think it's simply knowing if you wish to share your identity because you have concerns about what area of the country you're placed in, feel free to share with us, right? Something like that. In the same way with gender, with preferred names, which of course indicates a different gender identity in and of itself. So yeah, that being said, I think it's after an individual is accepted. And again, I think it can really happen in tandem with all the orientation materials that are emailed to us once we are actually accepted and once we are prepared to go in country.
I really appreciate you offering to help people with the language, because I do think that this is something that people worry about and are concerned about. How do we ask these questions in an appropriate and empathetic way? And it's not always obvious to everyone who hasn't been in the US about how these things are discussed or talked about in the US frames of diversity and identity as well. So again, Fulbright Prism really is a resource for all of the posts and commissions to contact with and communicate with to get assistance on these kinds of issues. I would really like to open the floor now to others who may have some questions. So I'm going to unpin us. And please, if anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you'd like to tap it into the chat. I'm also looking at the chat, but it would be great if people would just like to unmute and ask a question for Ruby.
Hi, this is Therese. I'm at Fulbright, New Zealand, and thanks so much, Ruby. That was really, really fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking the time, because you seem like you're very unwell at the minute. So I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of talk us through a lot of these issues, and it's really fascinating. I guess more than a question, I suppose it's more of a comment, really, but listening to some of your advice and your ideas, I'm just realizing how none of those are particularly onerous tasks. They're all things that we can do as a commission at Fulbright New Zealand. And I'm just thinking that particularly things like the resources, the medical resources, and learning about, what the legal status is and so on, those different things. We can handle all of that information. None of that is problematic. And I'm just thinking that that would be a really nice thing for us, a really important thing for us to have as part of our general kind of package of information that we give our grantees. And also, it might be a good stopgap between us and major systemic changes from ECA, which, like you say, could be quite some time in the making, So yeah, thank you for those super, super helpful tips, and we're definitely going to look to implement those here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad you found those helpful. And I think that's right. I think a lot of these changes are quite easy, quote unquote, and actually can serve as the opening of a conversation with the grantees. If a grantee knows that you have a supportive commission, if they know you're taking steps to support them, they will more easily reach out with questions and be more receptive for something like a buddy system, a sort of network of support between each other and the commission. I think that's a good starting point for an openness and trust that I think as LGBTQ students, we can have a lot of mistrust of institutions, especially institutions that are not American. Whether that's righteous or not, I don't know, but I think that's a good mitigating step.
I know we had quite a few questions. Oh, Isabel, I was going to say we had quite a few questions come through on the registration that we didn't get to. Isabel, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Thanks first and foremost, Ruby, for giving us your perspective about your Fulbright experience. It's really important, I think, that commissions get to hear grantee experiences, because we can't see or hear what everybody's individual experience is. So first and foremost, thank you. I was wondering, in terms of kind of the buddy system, how you as a former grantee yourself, as an alumni, would envision something like that. I think in our programs here in Korea, we have various ways that we kind of approach making people that are in the LGBTQ community feel a little bit more accepted, feel a little bit more supported. But we do also kind of give our, and I'll just speak for the ETA program myself, because that's what I work on, kind of give them the opportunity to make those bonds themselves. We set the stage for them during orientation. We allow them time to talk and meet together without kind of maybe the commissions being there, so they feel a little bit more free and available to just talk amongst themselves. What does a buddy system kind of look like to you, and how does a commission kind of traverse that line between like natural, spontaneous relations with other grantees, and then something that's facilitated from maybe the commission side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the balance that has to occur, and it has to be come from a localized point of what you believe is better for your grantees. However, I think the way I envision it is that once, and I will tell you that right away in my Fulbright program, and specifically the binational business program, a few of us found each other because that's how we used to connecting. People looking at each other's Instagram and seeing if they actually have a same-sex partner or things like this, and then getting in touch with each other. The sort of suggestion from my end is that those sort of informal conversations don't always happen and can leave more introverted individuals kind of more isolated. So I think there's a balance that can occur where a commission jumpstarts those conversations, whether it's during orientation, having just a session for these identity groups to coalesce, to share contact information. Of course, a lot of these individuals would not be living in the same region or city. And then I think there's room for creating a moderated, quote unquote, event from the commission, not often, not every week, maybe not even every month, but perhaps every 6 weeks, every other month, where there is an event that the Fulbright Commission will have one person, two people from the commission be there and say, if you are an LGBTQ, a member of the LGBTQ community or an ally and wish to come out and enjoy some time with these fellow students, whether it's a meal or whether it's an actual event for the LGBT community that's broader with the community, I think there's just a starting point where you can create the space for people to come together. And then of course, let those students connect themselves and chat with each other and stuff like that. I don't think that a buddy system where two people have to be together and have to check in with each other will work just because they're LGBTQ. I think that's actually a bad idea, right? I think they would feel bad. I think they would feel ghettoized. And I think inevitably, just because two people are LGBTQ doesn't mean they will get along. I can tell you that firsthand. And so forcing relationships will not work. But the point being here is that if you can open the floor and create the space for people to come to, individuals especially that are not as extroverted, then individuals in those relationships can be there, and that support can be there in case those individuals want it.
Thank you so much for sharing those ideas.
Absolutely.
Looks like I just being aware of Ruby's condition and the fact that she seems to be really losing her voice at this point. I think we can take probably a last question or two, if anyone has anything else they'd like to add or to ask.
If nobody has a question, I can ask a question.
Thanks. Isabel, go ahead.
So I have a question, kind of when you're talking about resources. You said that you are also a Mexican American and you were placed, or you went to Mexico for your program. we have some Korean Americans that are part of the LGBTQ community, but we also have a lot of grantees that are not a part, that are in the community and are not Korean, or maybe don't have that language ability. So do you kind of have any maybe advice or like anything kind of to share on that perspective, where maybe people in your own cohort or in your program maybe didn't have very fluent Spanish level, if that's the case for your program, I'm not sure, and how maybe the commission can kind of find resources on both ends, whether that be something in the US or also something locally based, just thinking about access to resources in regards to language.
Yeah, I don't know. In Mexican context, and specifically for the program, for the business program, we all had to be fluent. Doesn't mean everyone had perfect Spanish, but everyone had competent and very high competency of Spanish. So I don't know. I think there is a barrier in terms of expectations for Mexicans and non-Mexicans in my case, right? For LGBTQ Mexicans, you know, had a bit more cultural context, or Mexican Americans.
Ruby, I think we've lost some sound. Hello?
Better. Hello. Okay.
Sorry about that, Ruby. I think I lost some sound on my end, or I don't know
Anyway,
if I totally lost it.
it
Go
was
ahead.
just okay. Yeah, anyway, to wrap up, I don't know that I can answer that. I think having the resources in English would be just a workaround, and then maybe if an individual has to go to a doctor for a checkup or anything like that, setting up a system where somebody can go and assist them in terms of translating, specifically if it has to do with more intimate conversations that they're not comfortable sharing, for example, their host family or something like that. But I don't have any more suggestions.
So I'll open things up for one final question if anyone has one. Okay, if not, I have just one final thing to ask, Ruby, kind of related to this question also about translation and local communities, because I think quite a few of the questions that we had submitted during the registration also asked about this issue of balancing the American side of the program in terms of the way that LGBTQ plus is understood in the US versus what's going on locally. And as you said earlier, this is a very complex dynamic to negotiate. And it isn't one that we can have all the answers for very easily at our fingertips or make guides for, because it really depends on the situation. But I was wondering if you had any suggestions for how commissions and posts can approach local organizations, what to say to them or how to ask them to come, because I think your suggestion that bringing in local organizations and making grantees aware of what's available to them in country is really important. But we may be in some cases dealing with countries where being LGBTQ plus is not completely something that people are comfortable to be open with. There may be legal issues for this. So any suggestions you might give us about how do we find these organizations and how do we approach them and ask them to get involved in our programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to say is that maybe you don't have to get them involved in your program, just simply have the resources of where they are located and what they do for grantees to reach out and connect with those organizations themselves as members of the LGBT community. I think the second thing, in terms of finding local organizations, I can speak to the case of Mexico. where a lot of NGOs and nonprofits that deal with these issues don't have websites, but Facebook is the best way to find them. A lot of organizations simply have a Facebook page that you can receive messages and stuff like that. So I think that's the best advice in terms of finding local NGOs. In terms of actually collaborating with them, I think that's a harder ask. And I think actually leading with, we want to amplify your organization. We actually want to create an actionable step where we have help with volunteers. I mean, something where you are contributing to that organization itself is going to be the best way to connect with them, not simply we want help. And then the last thing to say, I think, is there's a lot of power in saying we are an organization that's affiliated with the United States and the State Department, right? I think there's a lot of power in that, and knowing that this is not going to have negative impacts on them. There are countries, of course, that will not be helpful. So it's just localized and you have to decide what's best for your country. But just to say, there doesn't need to have a relationship with the commission itself, but simply have a list of them, of these organizations that grantees themselves can connect with and can find community with them.
And Ruby, from what I understand, I think Fulbright Prism is trying to create a sort of online archive that's kind of crowdsourced from some alum of organizations that they have been in contact with in country. So that's another resource that commissions and posts can check out if they themselves don't have connections with some of these organizations in their own context. Is that right?
Absolutely. So all the resources that we currently have are at our website, which is fulbrightprism.org. We're trying to build that out, but for the moment, all that we have is there, and feel free to contact us at any time. And we're definitely a big team and trying to do a lot of things. So there's many people that can, if I don't have the answer, there's many different grantees that were in different countries that might have some insight.
Well, I really want to say again how much I appreciate your time and your sharing and your insight today. I know that these are very personal topics and it's not always the easiest thing to get up in front of a group of people at Fulbright and talk about these things. So I recognize, and I think we all recognize, that you are really doing something very helpful and contributing to us and putting yourself out there. So thank you. And I hope that you feel better. Please get well soon. Thanks again for staying up and doing this tonight when you weren't feeling your best. And everyone, let's give Ruby a little round of applause or a little emoji to just say thank you for her wonderful work today and her contributions to us doing better at supporting our LGBTQ plus grantees, staff, and everyone involved in the Fulbright program. Thank you so much, Ruby.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
And everyone, we will be having some more ECA occasional seminars starting early next year, so I will keep you in the loop about that. Jeremy, the Diversity and Inclusion Liaison from WHA, and I are also planning on some panels in the new year. One particularly that touches on some of the things we talked about today is a panel talking to heritage grantees who are navigating the difficulty of being between cultures when they're on a Fulbright program. So these announcements will be made on the EAP Diverse newsletter. So please, if you're not subscribed to that, do so that you can get information about upcoming events. And I hope that everyone has a good rest of the day or evening, and I'm looking forward to the next chance to communicate and to share with all of you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ruby.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all.
Thank you.